Well, welcome everyone. It's so nice to have you here with us today. My name is Mary Price. I'm the Events and Marketing Manager at the Shingo Institute at Utah State University. I'm so excited to have Drew Dillon with us today. Drew is an incredible person and he's had an amazing career. He's fluent in French, Japanese, and Mandarin. And because of his linguistic abilities, he's had the unique opportunity to be Dr. Shingo's interpreter and translator in the early 1980s. With the help of Productivity Press, he was also able to translate the Toyota production system works from Japanese into English. Since then, he has continued to gain more knowledge on management improvement and has been helping organizations in North America, Europe, and Asia for many years to sustain excellence.
Thank you, Mary. It's a great pleasure. And thank all of you for showing up here. I feel as though, even though you're compressed on a little rectangular screen, that I'm among old friends. And so for those of you whom I know already, hello. For those of you whom I don't know yet, welcome. I would like today to talk about almost everything, and I'm not going to be able to do that, obviously. But along the lines of a short essay that I wrote for the Shingo newsletter this January, I'd like to ask your indulgence for a little while to speak about how Shigeo Shingo might be looking at our moment in history. The reason I do this is twofold. One is that obviously we're living in an extraordinary time right now. Many people have described it much better than I can. But it's very clear to many of us that a lot of the dysfunctions and the various problems that we're running into today are ones, first of all, that touch everybody in the world one way or another. But secondly, these are problems and dysfunctions that are related to business as usual. They're related to the way we've been doing business and the way we've been thinking about the world. And so I think that it is a situation that is very much the sort that Mr. Shingo thought about a lot, and that his views on the matter may be useful for us as references. The second point about what's going on today is that I notice that the continuous improvement movement, the lean movement, the just-in-time movement, and so forth, is pretty much absent from the public conversation about what to do right now. And I find that quite remarkable. Many of you have found ways to continue success or to somehow profit from the disruptions that we're facing right now. Many of you maybe have not been able to do that. But when you consider the broad reach of the thinking and the practice of somebody like Shigeo Shingo, I find it quite extraordinary that his thinking is not represented in the public debate very much about how to rethink our societies and our economies. So what my ulterior motive in talking to you today is to contribute a little bit to starting or continuing a conversation along those lines. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm speaking to people with many of whom have a great deal of experience in the field of continuous improvement. Maybe some are even as old as I am, but that kind of experience is precisely, it seems to me, what may be of particular value to us as we redesign the way we do business and the way we think about our employees and public policy and so forth. So some of these issues I've touched on in the essay that I wrote for the newsletter. I will say very briefly that I'll try not to go over the same ground, although again I started from the same place that I just did. with this observation that that a lot of what Shigeo Shingo had to say in the 1980s until he died in 1990, in the 1970s and 1980s, seems to me to be of particular relevance to the world we live in today. And at the same time, we seem to be largely absent from the conversation. We're not at the table to a large extent. You probably have good views on why that may be. So I started there, and then I mentioned a couple of abiding preoccupations of Shigeo Shingo, which it seems to me to be, which it seems to me are entirely relevant to our times now, as we look for guidance and look for ways to build a stronger and better community of not just of profit-making organizations, but of organizations of all stripes. I'd like to say, first of all, that the last time that I spoke to a group with the Shingo Institute, I mentioned that the ideas and the tools and so forth that we get from the continuous improvement movement have often failed to flourish in our organizations. And I propose that one of the reasons for that, and I accept my part in this responsibility for this, by the way, one of the reasons for that is that we, to a large extent, have ignored the particular context in which these practices and these ways of thinking grew up, and we've tried to apply them in a different context. The analogy I used was that of trying to plant a plant suited for one climate in a completely different climate with completely different soil. And when we find that the soil, that the plant doesn't thrive, then we come to conclusions about it and about the nature of improvement that may be entirely unwarranted. And I think you've all probably seen this when you take particular practices or tools such as policy deployment or Teian suggestion systems or Jishuken, and you try to use them in organizations which are essentially machines for extracting the profit for the few from the many, or excuse me, profit from the many for the benefit of the few. That it simply doesn't work very well. This should be obvious in a moment's thought, that if you're looking for the strength in the ability of everybody in an organization to improve constantly, you're going to have a hard time getting their cooperation and drawing out their genius if they don't share in the benefits of those improvements. So it's pretty fundamental. And yet we still see this, and I still see organizations where the what we call lean or continuous improvement or Kaizen is thought to be a collection of tools that for maximizing efficiency and in any kind of organization. When things don't work out, either we blame the tools or we say that, well, it was we shouldn't have expected so much to begin with. So in my view, there has been a general lowering of expectations from this movement that Shigeo Shingo very clearly and repeatedly referred to as a revolution. His sense of the radical nature of improvement, the radical nature of Kaizen and of what is now called lean, is precisely what drew me into the business in the early 1980s. And those of you who have lived the exhilaration of changing processes entirely know exactly what that's all about. It's a strange place to be so many years later, when we can still go into organizations and still see so much waste. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, see that the methods and the tools and so forth, even the phrases that we use, have been cheapened to a large extent. Um, so so that's kind of my perspective on all of this. Um, and I want in particular to talk about two aspects of Shingo's thinking that relate to the Shingo Institute principles with which you're familiar. Now, Mr. Shingo obviously didn't know anything about the Shingo Institute principles because the Shingo Institute didn't exist when he was alive, or they didn't exist um, at the time when he was active. And yet, I think it's useful to try to understand some of the context in which he was working, some of the things that some of his fundamental presuppositions about the purpose of an organization and about the nature of improvement. And there are a couple of aspects of these Toyota precepts that I think deserve our attention right now. One is that it's very clear that the purpose of the company, the purpose of improvement, is to build a strong community. The term used in the precept is to build a strong country, but the intent is the same. The precepts also make clear that a cooperation and collaboration between people of various ranks is also very important and is fundamental to the success of the company. The sense in the precepts that it is important to build what is referred to as a family-like atmosphere, an atmosphere of friendliness and hominess, also appears in the precepts. These, by the way, were written they were put together in 1935 as an expression of the philosophy of Toyota's founder, and these were precepts that Mr. Shingo knew very well and obviously found congenial. And so the point there is there are two things of note. One is that he was certainly committed to the idea that the success of a company has to be linked to the success of the community. That it is not his was not a world in which you could expect to simply make a lot of profit at the expense of the larger community. And again, he was very clear about this. He talked incessantly about making the pie bigger for everybody rather than squabbling over diminishing pieces of the pie. This is important, and it's important as a piece of context when we introduce improvement methods and thinking into our own organizations. At the same time, Mr. Shingo emphasized the importance of questioning your assumptions. This is a point I made in the essay I wrote for the newsletter, and it appears over and over again in my discussions with Shingo, in my work with him in companies, in his books, and in the way that he tells his own story. That time and time again, he describes himself as having fallen into the habit of worshiping this or that particular god, statistical quality control, or what have you, and then disabusing himself of that particular belief when he realized that it just didn't work, that it wasn't sufficient. And this constant self-examination and self-criticism is a piece of the kind of culture that he inhabited, and it is often largely absent by comparison in many of the companies in the West that have worked to try to benefit from the advantages of the lean revolution. And in the sense that we all make our own cultures, every organization makes its own culture. We have many exceptions, and we have the opportunity within our own organizations to make it safe to make mistakes, to make it safe to criticize the common knowledge that's floating around. And it turns out that certainly when we try to benefit from Shingo's insights, that's extraordinarily important. So the this concept, this context is very important. Making a good context is very important. And I want to say something else about two of the principles. One is respect for people, and I've said something about that already. That respect for people, specifically in Shingo's world, means that you invest in them. You invest your time in them. You invest in their growth. There's a very famous line which perhaps many of you are familiar from Taiichi Ohno, when he says that building products means building people. How many times in the world at large have I run into companies whose managers and whose leaders obsess not with building people, but with finding good people? They essentially don't take on the responsibility of building people. They want to find good people, and often turnover rates are fairly high at such organizations, and continuous improvement has a hard time taking root. And the second principle that I wanted to mention is that of systemic thinking, and clearly we have a lot to say these days about systems thinking and so forth. Shingo's view on this was a little bit different. He saw a fundamental flaw in the way we thought about production, the way we think about work. And specifically, as he said over and over again, we confused tasks, the jobs that we do on the one hand, and processes on the other hand. And that it's very common to think of a process as simply as a series of tasks. And he points out that that's not it at all. It's entirely different. This point was driven home to me in a very forceful and a very personal way recently. My father died in the beginning of December, and I was with him in the emergency room for long hours. When he was waiting for a room, he was waiting to be transferred up to a room in the hospital itself. And everybody I met, all the overworked essential workers that I met, were inspiring. They were wonderful, and they were competent. And yet, when it came time to move him from one bed to another, from one stage to another, he was handled in a way where he was nobody's responsibility, and he died in that gap. He died at that transition point. Now, admittedly, he was 97 and a half years old, so he had a pretty good run. There's no question about that. But the point that occurred to me here, that was driven home forcefully to me there, is that on the one hand, everybody's doing a good job. Everybody's doing a heroically good job, and yet the system that we have has all these discontinuities in it, into which people fall, into which patients fall. And there are things we can do about that, and this particular institution is actually doing things about that right now. But it's it drove home the point very, very forcefully that a process is not simply the sum total of a bunch of tasks. So I think, Mary, if I've got this right, are we into question time already?
We are. Would you like to go there?
Yes, let's go there.
Perfect. Okay. So everyone, if you have a question to ask Drew, please use the Q&A chat. And we will wait for just a minute to allow you to answer or ask questions there. All right, Drew, our very first question is, what is your definition of a process?
Thank you. My definition of a process is a series of transformative steps. It's a series of transformations that convert some kind of raw material to a product. All right, so it's not the it's the transformations. It's not necessarily the tasks that effectuate the transformations. I also wanted to say, I neglected to say it before, that music that you heard at the very beginning is in honor of Robert Burns's birthday. So for those of you who got that, good on you.
Thank you, Drew. Our next question is, what other important opportunities do you see in healthcare?
I see all kinds of opportunities in healthcare. The little bit that I just gave you suggests that that we would do well to rethink the way we hand off patients, for example. As I say, I'm talking with this particular organization right now about how to do that. But we would measure things differently. It would perhaps be of interest to measure the number of times that a patient gets handed off. The thing that really struck me in the case of my father is that when it was over, I was standing around with a bunch of nurses who had been involved in this, and 3 of them independently wrung their hands and they said, "I didn't know your father." To them, he had fallen into a place where no one knew him, and I consider that to be important. He got the best care when he was interacting with people and they knew him and they had a sense of who he was. So I'm afraid that's not a very maybe not a specific answer for your organization, but I'm happy to discuss this further.
Thank you. Next question. What advice do you have for getting organizations more focused on systemic thinking?
Well, it has to come from leadership, first of all, for the organization to move. I think that if you are not at the top of the organization, but you still have some scope for action, that what you can do is to build your case. You can, and in particular, you can you can create spaces for experimentation where you can show how to perform a process a different way, and with results, because that's what people will listen to. At the same time, you can do the normal things, of course. You can, but pay attention to how the people at the top learn. Do they learn from their peers? Do they learn from books? Do they learn from Shingo Institute seminars? How do they learn? I think for most people, a big part of that answer is that they learn from actually seeing results. So any way you can do an experiment or do a series of experiments and produce results, I think will help your case.
Wonderful. Next question. Why do you think people abandon lean when it seems like it would be most helpful during times like these?
I think lean has been degraded and cheapened so much that it's barely recognizable. I mentioned in my essay that at several times during the pandemic, there have been articles on the front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal and other papers to the effect that basically just in time is over, and that the real problem is that we didn't have enough inventories. And this is quite an outrageous idea for those of us who have seen and who have worked over many years to simplify and shorten lead times, to simplify and shorten what are now called supply chains. And yet the basic understanding of just in time, for example, as you can find in the glossary of almost any business book, any production business book, is completely strange. It's treated as an inventory management philosophy, and that's not at all what it is. So we've allowed that to happen, and I think that probably I blame consultants to a large extent, because I think consultants have gone to a lot of trouble to sweeten the pill that they're trying to sell. And I don't know of any company any organization that's made really noteworthy dramatic progress without it being difficult. On the other hand, there are spectacular results when they do that. But if you're comfortable with continuous improvement and with your lean program right now, you're probably doing it wrong.
We have a few questions about books, and they would like to have recommendations, your top 3 recommendations on process improvement. Can you think of those off the top of your head?
Oh.
Okay,
No,
we'll pause on that question, but you send those to me and I'll send it out in a follow-up email, okay?
well, okay. I have to know you better before I can answer that question, because I don't. It's my observation over the years, and I'm beginning to get old now. It's my observation over the years that people who read the most books are not the ones who learn the most. People who learn the most are the ones who go in and dive in and make their own mistakes. Now, that said, I think there are some good books around. And if the question is more specific, I'll be happy to mention some of them. But I'm really not very good at the book recommendation business.
Okay. I want to make a note that, Drew, you've mentioned a few times about the article that you posted in the newsletter. And for those of you that haven't had a chance to read it, you're welcome to go to our website. It's shingo.org/articles to find the link to that article. All right, I think we have time for one last question. And let's see here. So, do you have suggestions for promoting engagement and ownership?
Excuse me, engagement at ownership?
And ownership, yes.
And ownership. Well, I'm afraid my answer to this is probably not very interesting to you, but it's very clear to me that in line with the previous answer that I gave. People generally, I think, have a pretty good idea of what's important to them and what's important to the boss. And if it's important to the boss that they improve, that they learn, if it's important to the boss that they be able to learn from action and from mistakes, then they'll do that. You'll find a way to do that. So I have not seen very much evidence that simply reading or discussing with people or cogitating and so forth works very well. And this is one of the reasons that the old style teaching, I guess we now call it mentoring, I'm not coaching, works much better than sort of fancy consulting nowadays, because it's guided practice. So my answer is twofold. First of all, make sure that the values are clear to everybody. Make sure everybody knows what's important to the organization and therefore to them. And secondly, find a way to learn by doing. It's more fun anyway.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Drew. It was always a pleasure to see you. And thanks for all of you for attending today. I hope that it was valuable for you. For those of you that don't know, these webinars happen every single month, and they're also turned into podcasts. So if you're interested in listening to a podcast, please search Shingo Principles Podcast. We're out there on every single app. And before we say goodbye today, please remember to check our website at shingo.org/events. You could find information on webinars, on our workshops that we offer, and of course, our 34th annual Shingo conference. I hope that you'll all be able to attend in person. We are going to be in Orlando, Florida on May 19th and 20th. And if you aren't able to attend in person, we will have a virtual component as well. And
Mary, may I say one last thing, Mary?
Of course, please.
To everybody, please, let's make this a revolution again. we need you.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you so much. We'll see you next month.